Can you believe the history behind the NFL draft? It is a tradition like no other in sports. Each and every year, fans get hyped around the players that could make a new impact on their favorite teams. With the 2024 NFL draft coming up, people are more excited than ever with the incredible talent that's coming into the league. Teams spend thousands of hours scouting players at the start of the college season to see who will fit their team best. Many dynasties begin with the NFL draft. Preparation and scouting is what it takes to build champions. But teams are not only looking for those superstars from college, they're also searching for those sleepers, those players they can get cheap and they can build a team around. In this video, we're going to dive through the history of the NFL draft and how it's evolved and the impact it's had on the league. As many of you know from our previous videos about the NFL, the league has a long history with its roots going back to the 1920s. But back then, the league looked very different from what we know today. The early days of professional football and the NFL lacked organization, especially around players' rights and how teams built rosters. Discussion around some sort of formal way to take players from college to the NFL began to be brought up in the 1930s. This was due to more college talent than ever. One player would be the leading factor for the need of a formal NFL draft. That would be University of Minnesota superstar running back / fullback Stan Kostka. Stan had an incredible college career. He was a true superstar in college football. For reference, he was 6 foot, 220, and completely dominated teams that he played. He averaged 6.8 yards per carry in his first 3 seasons with the team. He even once scored 4 touchdowns in one game and ran over every player he faced. Needless to say, there was a lot of hype around him for professional football, and many teams wanted his stardom. Stan, knowing how valuable he was, and knowing there was no formal way to put him on an NFL team, he took his time, essentially holding out for the highest possible offer. As an NFL holdout, it would take a while to get signed, but on August 25th, 1935, he would sign a $5,000 contract with the football team, the Brooklyn Dodgers. Even though he would hold out and sign, it would create a bidding war in professional football, and many teams realized that this could not go on. Owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, Bert Bell, had complaints about the Eagles' lack of competitiveness on the field. Bell was embarrassed by the product he had put on the field in recent years and knew that he had a lack of talent, which in turn would mean he would struggle to sell tickets and struggle to be profitable. Bell took this concern to the league's leadership, pitching the concept that smaller teams did not have the financial capability to compete with the better, more established teams, meaning that something had to be done to make sure that talent got to these bad teams. He believed that having a bad team would be a compounding issue, and the Eagles would continue to struggle, get worse, and then eventually fold, which in turn would look bad for the league, and the league that was trying to establish itself in the world of professional sports would look bad overall. On May 18, 1935, Bell proposed a draft to be instituted to enhance the competitiveness of the league. The teams in the league would all agree to the concept, and in the following season, they would decide to have the first ever NFL draft. Because as an ownership, they knew better teams meant more money, more success for the league, and overall would line their pockets more. The first rule to be established for the NFL draft would be that all teams had to list out college seniors that would be put into a pool. These players who were entered into the pool were considered to be available for the NFL draft. From there, each team would select in inverse order based off record. By drafting a player, the teams would have unilateral rights to negotiate contracts. If they failed to negotiate contracts, they could then trade the ownership rights to another team. This meant teams could improve themselves either through drafting or trading for a veteran player. One interesting caveat would be, if a team could not sign a player or trade that player away, the NFL would step in and attempt to arbitrate a settlement contract between the two. If the player did not sign, they would be locked out from the NFL season. The first ever NFL draft would take place on February 8th, 1936 at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia. There would be 90 players written on a blackboard in a meeting room which each team had the ability to select. Teams did not have their own scouting departments at the time and relied heavily on the very little media coverage. This meant any ideas of prospects would come from local newspapers. The 1936 NFL Draft would last 9 rounds. The Eagles would select Jay Berwanger as the first overall pick, but would not be able to sign him. They would end up trading him to the Bears, who would also not be able to sign him. But this was not surprising, as of the 81 players selected in that year's draft, only 24 would sign. Throughout the 30s and 40s, the draft would stay relatively the same, with many coaches and ownership relying heavily on newspapers and local coverage from reporters to get a better understanding of players. Wellington Mara of the New York Giants emerged during this time period as a guru of the NFL Draft. The reason behind this, he was subscribed to many magazines and out-of-town newspapers, meaning he had very in-depth knowledge of select players that most people did not know. Famously, in 1939, Mara would draft for the Giants and select a player that was not on any list. He became the first person to draft a player who was not on a list and surprised many of the league's ownerships. In 1946, the Los Angeles Rams would become the first team with an official scouting department. They would hire Eddie Kotal, who was a former Green Bay Packers player and coached at his alma mater, Lawrence University. He was well versed in knowing players and evaluating talent. The league did shortly implement. Other teams would follow suit shortly after this. In 1949, the first African American would be selected in the NFL Draft. George Taliaferro would be selected in the 13th round. However, he would decide not to sign and go with an AAFC team instead. Wally Triplett would be the official first African American player to be selected in the NFL Draft and assigned to an NFL team. The 1960s brought competition from the AFL, meaning there would be more attention on college players deciding on which league they would play in. This meant that better scouting by teams and more technology would be utilized to track player performance. It became a very competitive situation between the leagues striving for talent. This competitiveness over the NFL Draft would add an extra flair to the football season. Many teams would be challenged to find the best of the best and be able to sign them to their NFL teams. The 1970s and 80s would bring about even more change to the NFL Draft. The first would be in 1976. They would coin the phrase Mr. Irrelevant for the last pick of the draft. The first ever Mr. Irrelevant would be Paul Salata. The 80s brought more excitement and more technology for the NFL Draft, which meant more attention. The death of the AFL in the 1970s established the NFL as the dominant league with the highest quality talent. Pete Rozelle understood this and understood that they needed to generate more money, and this meant a great opportunity to partner with the struggling ESPN. Chet Simmons, president of ESPN, asked if they could cover the draft as a partner to the NFL. Rozelle would accept the deal, though he was highly skeptical that anyone would want to watch the NFL Draft. The 1980s media coverage from ESPN would help grow the network and bring about more popularity for the NFL. It was the shot in the arm that the network and the league both needed. Overall, the NFL Draft has grown exponentially over the last 3 decades. Nobody could imagine how big the NFL Draft would be today. Over the years, it's expanded on networks between ESPN and ABC, NFL Network, and Fox. Every sports channel has their own NFL Draft coverage leading up to the event. The events also changed from being a one-day event to being a 3-day, over the weekend, big spectacular. Sometimes it's held in New York City, sometimes Chicago, and sometimes other locations. In recent years, the draft's been moving more and more, including outdoor events in Philadelphia, Kansas City, and Cleveland. There is not a doubt in my mind that the NFL Draft will continue to grow over the next few decades. Be ready for more technology and more expertise. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know in the comments below who you hope your team will draft. We appreciate all of you. Believable Truth.